All right, hello everyone. My name is Dakoba, and welcome back to World of Warcraft. Today we're taking a look at my version 2 of my one-button rotation sequence using Gnome Sequencer Advanced for Guardian Druid. This one is working pretty well for me. If we open up, you can see that I've been able to achieve KSM, successfully tank 8 and 9 keys, and still working through on some of the other dungeons, but aiming for about 2,500 this season, and I think this sequence is going to get us there or darn close. Now, this is a Gnome Sequencer Advanced sequence, so you'll need to have GSE installed, and when you use it, you'll go ahead and import. This will import the Deck Guardian V2. I like to leave my old sequences there, just in case I want to go back to them. And what it is it is a, what GSE does is that it allows you to bind an entire rotation to a single key. So when you hit the key the first time, it fires the first macro in the sequence. When you hit it the second time, it fires the second macro in the sequence. When you hit it the third time, it fires the third macro in the sequence, and so on. How I use this is I bind this to my mouse scroll wheel. If you go into the key bindings key, you can go ahead and set a key binding for whichever sequence you want, and that has to be something that's not already in use by WoW. This can't override key binding setup through the default WoW interface. I use the square bracket, and then I have a programmable mouse that lets me rebind my mouse scroll wheel down to do that. So if I scroll my wheel while I'm chatting, you can see that it types out the left square bracket there, and then scroll up is actually bound to the right square bracket. I don't use that on Guardian though. That's for some other classes that I use. But in case I need to run a second sequence, I can do it in that way. Now, when you bind Gnome Sequencer in a way that lets you tap the key very quickly, or if you just hit it multiple times within a global cooldown, how it works is that it's going to try running that first sequence, and the first time I hit it, it's going to successfully cast Mangle. That'll trip the global cooldown. Ironfur is not on the global cooldown, so if I have enough rage, it will also cast Ironfur. The next time I hit it, it's going to try and cast this sequence. And so that'll successfully cast Thrash the first time, and then again it tries to cast Ironfur if I have enough rage. The next time it'll cast Lunar Beam, and so on. Now if I hit this multiple times within a global cooldown, so let's say I've been using the sequence for a little bit and many of my abilities are on cooldown, I maybe have some rage, maybe don't. So what's going to happen is, let's say it tries to, it loops through all the sequences or all the macros and comes back around to the top, and it comes back to the sequence. If Mangle is still on cooldown, then this is going to fail. It won't trip a new global cooldown. So it'll come down to this one. If this is a cast sequence and it needs to cycle through, so if Thrash is on cooldown, it'll fire Moonfire. But if the next cast in the sequence is Thrash, and Thrash is still on cooldown, this one will fail as well. And so it'll move to the next one. Lunar Beam has a long cooldown. If that's still on cooldown, it'll go to the next one. Same with Rage of the Sleeper, same with Incarnation. And then if that one fails, it'll cast Swipe. Now, Swipe has no cooldown. That's something that can be spammed over and over again. So if the rest of the sequences fail, it will cast Swipe. But in general, I'm moving through this entire sequence in each global cooldown, and it's going to hit whichever is the highest priority item in this list, that is off cooldown and that I have the rage to do at each turn. Now, sequence 1 is the same as version 1 of the macro. It's a little bit more efficient. I've cleaned it up just a little bit. Sequence 2 is the big new addition though, and if you go into configuration, you can change which version you want to use, either 1 or 2 there in the default version dropdown. And then sequence 2 has a very similar core rotation, but it includes a couple of additional blocks. Notably, it uses Frenzied Regeneration, and then it also has Bark Skin, so it will trip both Bark Skin and Frenzied Regeneration. Now, this is going to lower the ceiling of the sequence a little bit. This is going to give you a little bit fewer options, but if you're sticking to either normal, heroic, Mythic 0 dungeons, or even low keys, or normal raid, you really aren't going to need that extra survivability and healing. It's not going to be doing much for you, and so if you forget to use them, then this will allow you to sort of take advantage of those spells when they would otherwise be sitting idle. So that's the big advantage there, is that it further simplifies the sequence at the cost of some amount of capability. So version 2 is there, and again, to change that, you simply go into the configuration and select your default version however you want. And you can also select different default versions for different sequences. So if you want to use version 1 in keys, but version 2 in raid, then you can do that. All right, now in terms of setting up your character and statting, with most tanks, and certainly with Guardian Druid, item level is going to be key. The stamina and the main stat agility for us is going to be the biggest determining factor of how survivable you are, how much damage you do, and things like that. But as far as secondary stats go, haste and versatility are key. Versatility is going to give you more survivability. Haste is going to make everything flow a lot better. It reduces the cooldown on many of your abilities, and as well as your global cooldown, so you can just hit more keys more faster. So I try and run haste verse on as many of the pieces as I can. Obviously, with tier pieces, we don't get to choose what our stats are, but I almost always choose at least either haste or versatility. And then haste works particularly well when you use a sequence like this. Now, crit is very powerful for druids. It certainly gives us more damage, but it makes our survivability more spiky, which isn't great if you are, especially if you're taking some of your survival cooldowns and sort of removing them from your ability to use them on demand by putting them into a sequence like this. So I don't recommend getting a lot of crit if you are using the sequence. And then mastery is just a very level, very steady stat for us. It works similarly to haste and versatility, but I find that it's not quite as effective, not quite as satisfying to use. So that's that. I'll post my talents below so you can take a look at them, but they're pretty standard talents. The one thing that's somewhat different is that I run the Rend and Tear and Ursoc's Fury. I'll post my talents down below. As far as talents go, I'm using the same ones I used in version 1. They're still holding up for me. They're still working great. They're a little different. And this should work pretty well with the Wowhead talents. The one thing to note is that it is on Alloon's Chosen for your hero talents. So that's what you want to use. And then in terms of trinkets, I like to run the Refracting Aggression module because it functions as an extra defensive cooldown. I use that when I'm charging into a new pack and a key. Just to help balance out sort of the spike in damage that comes. And we'll talk about that when we look at a key here in a minute. My other trinket is a Sack Brood. It's a fantastic trinket, got lucky in a vault. But any 2 defensive trinkets if you need more survivability, and then any 2 just agility or DPS trinkets as you're able to, if you're sticking to content that isn't sort of threatening your survival. Otherwise, you'll want to use your Foresight and then Authority of Air for your weapon enchant. As far as consumables, I run versatility flasks for my flasks and then rib stickers for my food. I like having a little bit of extra stamina come from my food as well as some agility, but the Beladar's Bounty is pretty good as well. And then for my battle pots, I use the Cave Dweller's Delight, which functions as a second sort of emergency heal. I find that's much more valuable than a bit of extra damage as a tank. So I run the Cave Dweller's Delight and then my healing potions as my second ones. In terms of additional abilities that you'll want to use outside of the sequence, I don't bind Survival Instincts into the sequence at all. That's a long cooldown and a fairly major one, so I recommend holding that and using it on demand. And I actually recommend doing the same with Bark-Skinned and Frenzied Regeneration. That's what version 1 of the macro is for, because that allows you to have a little bit more refined, a little bit more precise control while taking care of your major DPS cooldowns. And Lunar Beam, I actually didn't have in the sequence originally, but when I got the Refracting Aggression module, that functions as a defensive cooldown on about the same cooldown as Lunar Beam, and so I was able to sort of replace that in how I play. But before, what I would do is whenever I ran into a new pack, I would trip either Lunar Beam or Barkskin, and that would allow me to have defensives up when I hit that new pack, because whenever you enter a new pack and you start to take damage, it sometimes takes the healer a minute to ramp up any healing that you get, and you want to find sort of that nice flow, and anything you can do to sort of smooth the damage curve as you pull a new pack is really nice. The other talent that I run that affects what abilities you'll use is the Dream of Cenarius, which gives us regrowth procs. That is something that I have bound actually on my 6 key as my Remove Corruption. I have that bound as a mouse over macro, and then I also have a shift button on the same one that does a regrowth on my same target. I tend to actually click that because it's old muscle memory, and I forget that I can use the shift 6 there, but that is something that is available there. And I recommend doing, because if you don't need that proc and there's damage coming out, if you can throw out some spot healing, help out your healer, that'll go a long way. And then Remove Corruption is fantastic, especially for certain affixes that we can get. This week we have the healing debuff affix that we can cleanse, and so we can cleanse ourselves, we can cleanse someone else in our group, and that's really helpful as well. And then, of course, we've got things like our taunt and our incapacitating or our AoE sort of disrupt ability, and our interrupt on cooldown as well. All right, let's take a look at a key that I ran. All right, so here we are in a Mists of Tirna Scithe 7, and for the most part, this run went pretty smoothly. We had one hiccup before the second boss, which we'll look at, and I'm not sure what happened there. I just got one-shot by a new pack, so I'm not really sure what that was about, but otherwise things went pretty smoothly. And for the most part, I'm watching my feet, trying to keep the enemies positioned where the DPS can do as much damage as possible. Ultimately, the tank is not going to be contributing enough damage that I need to worry about my positioning except for survival. It's more about setting up the enemies so that the DPS can do their job. We are very much in a support role as tanks. Our job is to support our group and make things as easy on them as possible. So to that end, we are watching, we're hitting interrupts where we can, we're throwing down emergency heals whenever we get a proc out, we're helping with our cleanses on when the affix comes out. Now, even though we have a shaman in the group and they're able to hit their poison cleanse totem, that helps a lot with the affix. We also have the priest with mass dispel, so sometimes they just pop that immediately. But any little thing we can do to help is very big. So we got a regrowth proc during the execute there. We didn't end up using it because he was in execute, he was stunned, but we got another one right as this damage starts to come out, so I throw that out on the monk, and then also start working on clearing some of the debuffs, and took a frontal there because I was distracted trying to cleanse those debuffs, so that was a mistake I made, could do better for sure, but we managed to down the boss easily enough. And then we head into the maze. Now, there are weak auras you can get that make this maze much easier. I have them on my other laptop, but I don't have them on this one, so that's definitely something I can clean up, but you can find those on wago.io. You can just search for, Mists of Tirna Scithe Maze Helper, and you'll find something here. Let's go through this. This section went pretty smoothly, so we can speed through this a bit. And it's mostly just, like I said, trying to control the positioning of the fight, keep the enemies out of the blue goo that they drop on the ground. So here I run in and just get one shot, and I take a look at this, and they're hitting me for 2.4 million health. Those are the two single biggest hits I took in the entire dungeon. Even bosses don't hit me for that. Now, I see my group is struggling, the healer has died, everybody's running, and so I run into the mists over here. That teleports the rest of the group back to me, so we all sort of reform there, and then we start running in together. And the idea there is that hopefully we can, group up and save some lives. We do end up losing the monk simply because I don't have the ability to regain threat on the group fast enough. They're using some pretty heavy casts on him and charging in and getting him. But ultimately we only lost the healer and 1 DPS instead of a full wipe there, so saves us a little bit of time on the timer. And I'm still not sure what happened with that death. I have no idea why they hit me so hard there, but that was sort of the only hiccup in the entire instance. The rest went pretty smoothly. And we get in here to Mistcaller. Now, Mistcaller as a tank is a pretty straightforward fight. You just need to focus on the boss because the boss does the interrupt that only the tank can hit. And so then you also need to watch positioning. So we're a melee-heavy group here. And so we're getting a lot of our frozen Vulpins in melee. And so I'm just making sure that whenever it charges the group, I'm pulling the boss away. And then when I'm able, I throw down my Ursul's Vortex to keep the fox ripped away as well. And then when the guessing game comes out, I mostly leave it to my group to find the enemy we're looking to fight, and I just keep my eyes on the boss and watch for that interrupt, because if you miss that interrupt, that is a one shot. You will die, and it will wipe the group, especially in a 7 on a tyrannical week. So that is something that you want to make a point of doing. And so once I see where the group is collapsing, I go ahead and solve it. As a tank, I don't even try and solve the thing. That's not my job. My job is to hold the boss, make sure that we get interrupted, and then, you know, position so that the freeze doesn't hit the group. But that boss falls pretty easily. We move on. And it's like I can't... Getting some stuttering in the video playback here, but... we move on to the final boss and manage to kill it without issue. I think there's a miscommunication with the group here. It's something I probably should have talked about a little more, but during the second Mind Link, they split in different directions around me, and I'm sort of stuck in the middle, which is not where you want to be as a tank. But we managed to clear it, down the boss, and 2-key the key. So overall, it's a really solid sequence. Again, that was a 7-key, very respectable in terms of damage, and I didn't really struggle at any point. That's the key part of it, is that there was no place where, except for that one point where I just got chunked hard, and I still don't know why. Like, I went back through the log after the fight, and the next largest hit I took was 2 million from a boss. It was a 2 million melee, and those two guys just hit me for 2.4 apiece, and... So I was killed from full health instantly, and that's that. But outside of that, the key went very smoothly, very easily. And again, it's on a tyrannical week, so you would expect bosses to be a little harder and trash packs to be a little easier. But overall, everything went very, very smoothly. So I'm really pleased with this sequence. I'd love if you guys could test it out and give me let me know how it works for you. And I'd like to thank you guys for taking a few minutes to watch this video today. I hope that you found it helpful. Leave a like if you have, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. My name is DDPuMaqd, and I hope you have an epic day.